This is the Philadelphia Flyers Young Star Ranking. I'm going to go through players drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers from the years of 2014 to 2020. The catch is I'm going to do it by position. I'm going to try to avoid a lot of these apples and oranges situations, and I'm going to try to compare players that have maybe a future role alignment with the other players and try to avoid some of these goaltender center type of relationships. Let's get into it. Okay, let's talk Flyers centers. The Flyers have a lot of depth, but it's really at the youth position at center that is very intriguing. It's a little open right now, and the Flyers have a bunch of names that people might be really excited about to also maybe kind of forgetting about, and I want to go through them. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up the rankings. Again, there's a different count for each single person included in this. In this particular, this will be a count of 10. So starting at number 10, we're going to start with at the bottom of the list. I'm going to give it to Marcus Westphal. Marcus Westphal is a Swedish player. He plays in Allsvenskan. Right now, I'm probably saying that wrong. He's got really good size. He's a pretty big kid. He's at 6'3". He was taken pretty late in the draft as well. Taken at 205, in 2018. Not a lot of NHL upside I see from him, but that could change. Again, just because he's at the bottom of the list doesn't mean he'll overall be the worst player, but where I kind of see him right now, outside of his size, I don't really see him playing in the NHL, potentially coming here playing for the Flyers in the AHL, but I put him at the bottom of the list because it seems like it might not be an NHL future for him, or at least an AHL future for him. It could be like a long-term Swedish player, but we never know. I wouldn't be surprised if he surprises me, because sometimes these seventh-round picks, as we'll see some of the other ones, they have success later in their career. So going up to number 9, we have Gavin Hain. Gavin Hain is also a pretty good player. I mean, he was taken obviously later in the draft as well. He's not anybody who's going to necessarily stick out scoring sheet-wise. I mean, he doesn't really put up that many points. He had 9 points last year in North Dakota, 10 points this year in North Dakota with 3 less games. So, minor improvement. But he's really going to be more of like a bottom 6 guy if he ever turns out to be anything. I could see him maybe flaking out and, maybe playing a little bit in the AHL. But at this point, he does not project to be an NHL forward. I could be wrong about that, absolutely. And just because a kid only projects to be an AHL player doesn't mean he won't ever sniff the NHL, but it's kind of up to him. So far, I would say he's probably going to fall in the category. We probably will not see him in a Flyers, maybe a Phantoms uniform. This is where the list starts getting interesting. So now I go to number 8, and I have Pascal Laberge. Now, I kept Laberge as a center. I kept him because he played juniors as a center. He did play some right wing as well. He was kind of a goal scorer, but also a two-way player. He was drafted as a two-way player. He was a former second-round pick, but a very early second-round pick at a number 36. So this is a player who actually has a lot of talent. He has a fantastic shot, but injuries really plagued him. Not the only one in the Flyers system that had injuries plague them, but Pascal Laberge is going to be that guy who's kind of limited by his physical gifts. So we'll see. He played most of his time in the ECHL, but when he did play in the AHL last year, he actually caught fire and scored goals. Again, this is a kid with a pretty big shot, so somebody that people should keep an eye on and maybe will jump up this list. But overall, I think he's pretty appropriate where he is with the names above him. So above him, Mikhail Vorobyev is the next guy. Now, Vorobyev is not with the team anymore. He signed in the KHL. He is having success in the KHL, and that's why I put him on this list. He's still owned by the Flyers, still property of the Flyers, had an NHL touch, played NHL games, had one fantastic preseason where everybody thought he was going to be a breakout NHL player. That is still possible for him. As his maturity changes, the Flyers still own his rights. He could be back in 2-3 years if there's real money on the table for him to play in the NHL. But odds are, if money's a factor, Vorobyev probably will not be playing here anymore. Will probably finish out his career maybe overseas, but could change. Flyers own his rights, and I think he's still a pretty decent AHL option. I mean, AHL for sure, NHL future potentially. Still a decent prospect, and even at his age group, maybe he's not even a prospect anymore in 2015. So next on the list, number 6, we have Connor Bunnaman. Now, Connor Bunnaman is a pretty good center. I mean, he he had himself a nice little pro career so far. He came in a little bit slower, had a breakout year, then all of a sudden he's in the NHL, he's getting real games. The games he was even put in, he did play well. He had his ups and downs during the season, but I would say more ups than downs. I think kind of proved to everybody that he is an NHL player. To the degree, we're still not sure, but I would say at bare minimum, he's a fourth-line NHL player. I mean, the fact that he's doing what he's doing after being, 109 overall pick, again, a little bit later in the draft, right? That's the trend you're going to see here, is these guys kind of make their way up. Connor Bunnaman is an NHL future, so I think he's really good. I think he's nicely in that spot, only really because the talent above him is a little bit higher as far as an overall ceiling. But the fact that he touched the NHL already at a young age is very impressive, and could jump some of the names above him. Maybe even in the near future. We'll see. The sky is kind of the limit for most of these kids. Based off their talent, they typically have enough talent to play in the NHL, but it's did they put everything else together? So moving on from Connor Bunnaman, we have Jay O'Brien. Now, Jay O'Brien maybe is the biggest X factor on this list. This is a guy who overall maybe can move to as high as number 3 on the list. But right now, looking pretty good for Jay O'Brien, at least to have a better season next year. He played for the BCHL last year, had a really good season there, but again, that's a step down from where he was playing in the NCAA. We'll see what's going on with COVID and everything, but Jay O'Brien should at the very least develop to be an NHL player. I put him above Bunnaman because I think that's his kind of bare minimum. But we'll see. Injuries were a problem so far. I do suspect he'll get past that. He's a pretty thick kid. He's a pretty strong kid. I think he might be a little bit of a late bloomer, and I think the Flyers might have knew that going into it, especially because he was kind of a prep school draftee rather than a juniors player. We'll see. He's got really good wheels, got good skill all around. Could be another Scott Lawton type of player, but we'll see. We'll see how Jay O'Brien develops, and he's gonna have to stay healthy, and he's gonna have to do it playing in college hockey. That'll be a huge indicator of his NHL potential overall. And if he doesn't have good potential, he'll drop down this list. If he does, he'll move his way up, in my opinion. Next, number 4, Tanner Laczynski. Tanner Laczynski is a very intriguing project. This is a player who had a very good NCAA career. He was another late round, mid to late round pick, however you kind of want to see that, at 196. So obviously not taking that high, but definitely outdid expectations. I mean, he had Hobey Baker awards. He was completely consistent. He had captain-like leadership for his team. Again, just overall a good player and plays a very solid two-way game. This is a guy who could actually end up playing in the NHL next year, maybe halfway through, maybe immediately. And it really depends. It depends, obviously, 1, on COVID. 2, depends on spots available. He's definitely a top 6 forward in the AHL already. So you're going to see him get an elevated role, even if he doesn't make the NHL. But I do suspect he'll make a lot of noise at camp and get people pretty excited for a guy who maybe is not ready now, but is potentially ready for the near future to play a bottom 6 role in the NHL. So, moving on to next. Now, this is one that probably is maybe a little controversial. Maybe some people think he needs to drop a little bit below Laczynski just because of injury concerns, but German Rubtsov, a former first-round pick. At one point, he was actually ranked really high in that draft as well. The Maldonia scandal kind of dropped his rankings. Plus, obvious, shortcomings in his game. He's not a true elite number 1 center kind of caliber guy that should be taken at number 11. He's more of a middle 6 scorer, really good playmaker, has a two-way ability, really savvy, got a pretty good shot, definitely an offensive game, plays a really smart game, but again, injuries have been an issue. Clear cut. He had a breakout and then dealt with injuries the next year. And this is another guy who has a Russian factor, right? If he doesn't have success here in the NHL, he's going to go to Russia to get paid. I mean, it's just, why wouldn't he? Why would you want to get paid less money to play, against pros? If he's playing in the AHL and collecting under $1 million a year, he can go get a lot more than that playing in the KHL, especially being a former first-round pick. So, German Rubtsov is a player who's really interesting. I think the Flyers really like him, and I think if he can just stay healthy, they definitely see an NHL future for him. And I think he will get over that. A player I've been very excited about. I can't predict injuries, but game overall, I think his game is pretty close to NHL ready. If it wasn't even ready last year, at times, just what happened to his game over that injury-filled year. I mean, we've seen what happens with injuries, especially young players, confidence and everything around that. So he's going to have to prove it. I could be really like him and say all this stuff, but it doesn't matter. He has to prove it on the ice. He's got to get his production back up. But the Flyers didn't give him a sniff for no reason. So my most controversial pick probably is my number 2. Just kidding. Morgan Frost, number 2 ranked, and why he's not number 2, you'll see who number 1 is. But Morgan Frost, obviously, he has a very high ceiling. We don't really know. There's a little bit of a discrepancy whether he's going to be kind of a second-tier guy in the second-line center role, or is he going to be a top-line guy? Is he a top 6 forward, or is he a star? And that's really the question with Morgan Frost. Not really, is he going to be a great player in the NHL? He's definitely going to be a valuable player in the NHL. At the very least, you're going to see him playing in a top 9 NHL role. He already did it in his rookie year. It's just how far can he take that ceiling? So far, so good. It's not a huge deal that he didn't play much in the NHL last year. Again, he's slightly thin, doesn't have a ton of experience defensively, and that's a tough role, especially for a playoff team. And you saw what happened to other guys who had more defensive acuity and really got outshone at times in the playoffs. So you don't necessarily want to do that to a kid. So they trying to avoid that. But definitely, in my opinion, he's on a very least a TK-like path with production. We saw Claude Giroux do this. These are guys who tend to up their production every year. I would look for that at the end for Frost, and could be the steal of the draft in the end from his draft year. It wasn't the strongest draft that year as far as depth, but Morgan being taken early and also later on and having a huge jump. So far, so good. I'm super excited about him. I know everybody else is. I don't know if he's going to play third line center, but in the NHL, but he's definitely going to play in the NHL next year. I cannot see him sitting in the minors. He's too talented, and it's only a matter of time until he surpasses his expectations of last season and becomes just too good to be playing in the AHL. Moving to number 1, and this one is maybe the controversial pick, and really just because of the argument over Morgan Frost, and I think with me, I do not waver. I take Nolan Patrick, number 1, ranked center depth within as far as the young stars. He was taken 2nd overall, played in the NHL immediately, played the following year immediately. Yes, he had a struggling year, but for various reasons, and they were different each year. So we have to consider that. He didn't come in and kind of light the world on fire statistically. He had those moments, but the Flyers were actually really bad when he was on the team. They played poorly as a team. Even though the talent level wasn't that different, just uniting as a team, it wasn't there. I would love to see what he does under a team that plays as well as this team played last season, what he could do in a third-line role spot. And, as we speak, he's scheduled to play his sixth game in those scrimmages. He's working his way back. I do feel pretty confident that he's going to make his way back if he stays there. Again, injuries, how many times do I have to say this, right? It's almost upsetting and how much talent is at risk from injuries, but this is why you need depth. Nolan Patrick's career, in my opinion, his ceiling is still an elite center. I believe that just like a lot of other young players like Sean Couturier making it into the NHL on a year where you have abdominal core surgery is so freaking rare. Maybe even a mistake by the Flyers to even give him that benefit of the doubt. But again, even Sean Couturier didn't make the NHL with an injury. It's very important to remember that. It's no training camp. This kid walked into the NHL and produced more than adult men. So it's great to doubt his health. Like, I understand that. It's a reasonable thing. But to doubt the skill set, I don't really think that's justified at all. And I think at the pace that he's been moving, at the very least, he's a second-line player in the NHL at his production rate and his growth rate. It just depends on health. If he gets back to 100%, he's on this team. He's potentially the number 1 center of the future. And I think he's my number 1. And all of these players could shift up and down. These are the current rankings as of November 4th, 2020. So realize that anything could change from here. But it's exciting to see how much depth the Flyers have at center. Nothing really to worry about, and you see that even if Patrick fails, there are some names behind him that could also elevate, also come up and maybe fill those roles. And that's what it's all about in depth in these championships.